Before the story sweeps you away, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If our tales touch your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the love. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1, The Dignified Nurse. The fluorescent lights of Metropolitan Hospital's East Wing buzzed faintly overhead as Amelia moved with practiced efficiency between patient rooms. Her white uniform contrasted beautifully against her smooth, copper-brown skin, her braids pulled back into an immaculate bun that had yet to loosen despite 12 hours into her shift. At 28, Amelia carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect without demanding it, a trait inherited from her mother, Stella. Miss Jackson in 422 needs her antibiotics in 30 minutes, she reminded the younger nurse trailing behind her, and Mr. Watson's daughter will be arriving at 7 to discuss his discharge plan. Have his paperwork ready. Yes, Nurse Tyrone, the new hire replied, scribbling notes frantically. Amelia glanced at her watch, 6:07 a.m. The night shift was nearly complete, and fatigue pulled at her limbs, yet her posture remained impeccable, her voice steady. She'd learned early that excellence wasn't optional, it was mandatory. I don't know how you do it, the young nurse marveled. 3 consecutive night shifts, and you still look like you could walk a runway. Amelia offered a small smile. Focus on the patients, Tara. Everything else is secondary. As she approached the nurse's station to complete her charts, Amelia felt a presence beside her before she saw him. The subtle scent of expensive cologne announced Dr. Reynolds before his words did. Nurse Tyrone, he drawled, leaning unnecessarily close as he reached for a patient file, working overtime again. You know, I could think of more pleasurable ways to spend those extra hours. Without flinching or looking up from her documentation, Amelia replied, I believe your wife might have suggestions as well, Dr. Reynolds. Perhaps you should consult her. Her voice remained professional, neither cold nor heated, simply matter of fact. The doctor stiffened, then retreated with a forced chuckle. Always so serious, Tyrone. Around the station, several nurses exchanged knowing glances. This wasn't the first time Dr. Reynolds had made inappropriate overtures, nor was it the first time Amelia had deflected them with unruffled composure. You should report him, whispered Nurse Chen, sliding into the chair beside her. And say what? Amelia asked, her pen moving steadily across the form. That he stands too close, makes vague suggestions. He's careful to stay just on this side of actionable. It's still harassment. It's Tuesday, Amelia countered with a slight shrug. I choose my battles. This one isn't worth the energy. As she completed her paperwork, Amelia's mind drifted to her mother's voice, a constant presence in her thoughts. A woman's dignity is her armor in this world, Amelia. Once you compromise it, you spend a lifetime trying to restore what was freely given away. Stella had raised her daughter alone after Amelia's father disappeared upon learning his child would be a girl, not the son he'd been boasting about to friends. His loss, Stella would say whenever Amelia asked about him as a child. He missed watching the most magnificent woman grow up. There was never bitterness in her voice, only certainty, as though his absence merely confirmed what she already knew about his character. Amelia gathered her belongings from her locker after completing her shift, exchanging the white uniform for dark jeans and a soft blue blouse. The hospital was fully awake now, day shift bustling through the corridors with fresh energy. Amelia, called Dr. Winters, the chief of cardiology, hurrying to catch her before she left. Unlike most of his colleagues, Dr. Winters, a 60-something gentleman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, always addressed the nursing staff by their first names, viewing them as essential collaborators rather than subordinates. I'm glad I caught you, he said, slightly out of breath. That technique you used with Mr. Authie yesterday, walking him through his breathing exercises while redirecting his anxiety about the procedure, was brilliant. Would you consider demonstrating it at next week's staff development? Amelia nodded, touched by the recognition. Of course, Doctor. I'd be happy to. Excellent. And how's your mother? Has she recovered from that fall last month? Much better, thank you. The physical therapy is helping. Dr. Winters smiled warmly. Give her my regards and get some rest, Amelia. You've earned it. The conversation lingered pleasantly in Amelia's mind as she drove home through the awakening city. These moments, when her skill and compassion were acknowledged not for how she looked but for the difference she made, felt like victories. Her apartment was a modest one-bedroom in a mid-century building 20 minutes from the hospital. What it lacked in space, it made up for in character: large windows that welcomed morning light, warm wooden floors, and walls adorned with framed photographs of her mother, her nursing school graduation, and landscapes from the single splurge vacation she'd taken to Costa Rica 2 years ago. Amelia kicked off her shoes at the door and made her way to the kitchen, where she heated water for tea. While waiting for the kettle, she called her mother, as she did after every night shift. "Morning, Mama," she said when Stella answered on the second ring. "There's my girl. How were the patients tonight?" "Mostly stable. Mrs. Rodriguez's grandchildren snuck in past visiting hours again. I pretended not to notice." Her mother's chuckle was warm through the phone. Sometimes rules need bending when love is involved. "Have you eaten?" "About to make some eggs before I sleep." "Good. A woman needs her strength, especially one carrying the weight of healing others." They spoke for 10 more minutes, their conversation flowing with the ease of two people who had been each other's constant for decades. Stella never failed to ask about Amelia's day, her dreams, her plans, treating her daughter's life as the most fascinating story unfolding. After they said their goodbyes, Amelia prepared a simple breakfast, ate while scanning a medical journal article, then showered and slipped into her favorite sleep shirt, an oversized cotton tee with, "Nevertheless," she persisted, printed across the front, a gift from her mother. As sleep claimed her, Amelia's thoughts drifted to tomorrow's challenges: a new cardiac patient being transferred to her floor, the staff development presentation she needed to prepare, and the persistent rumors of budget cuts that might affect nursing staff. But these concerns would wait. For now, she allowed herself the luxury of rest, knowing that her worth wasn't measured by others' perceptions but by the standard she set for herself. In the quiet of her apartment, with sunlight filtering through partially drawn blinds, Amelia slept, a woman of uncommon dignity in a world that too often failed to recognize it, unaware that her life was about to intersect with forces that would challenge everything she believed about love, privilege, and her own carefully constructed boundaries. Chapter 2: The Troubling Incident. 3 days after her conversation with Dr. Winters, Amelia found herself rushing toward the supply room on the 4th floor. A patient in critical condition needed specialized cardiac monitoring equipment, and every second counted. As she turned the corner, her steps faltered at the sound of male laughter echoing from inside the very room she needed to access. "I'm telling you, man, she's ice on the outside, but you know what they say about the quiet ones," a voice she recognized as Dr. Landry's carried through the partially open door. "Tyrone's built like a goddess but acts like she's better than everyone," another voice chimed in, Dr. Michaels, the new neurologist. "Bet she wouldn't be so uptight if someone showed her a good time," added a third voice, Dr. Patel, whom Amelia had previously respected for his surgical skill. Amelia's hand froze on the door handle, her heart drumming against her ribs. The supply room was at the end of a seldom-used corridor, temporarily housing overflow equipment while renovations were underway in the main storage area. Few people had reason to be there, especially 3 doctors at once. "Choose your battles," she reminded herself. The patient needed the equipment. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The 3 men fell silent instantly, exchanging glances before Dr. Landry's face stretched into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Nurse Tyrone, we were just discussing the Peterson case," he lied smoothly. "What brings you to this forgotten corner of the hospital?" "Cardiac monitor for room 418, Amelia replied, her voice controlled as she moved toward the shelving unit. The narrow space suddenly felt suffocating as the men shifted, effectively blocking her path to the equipment she needed. "No rush," Dr. Michaels said, leaning against the shelf. "Blake's handling it." "Dr. Martinez asked for me specifically," Amelia countered, taking another step forward. "Excuse me, please." None of them moved. Instead, Dr. Patel crossed his arms, his gaze traveling down her body with deliberate slowness. You know, Tyrone, you could go far in this hospital with the right support. We were just saying what a waste it is that someone with your talent stays so isolated. Amelia met his gaze directly. My talents are fully recognized by those whose opinions matter professionally. Her voice remained even, though her pulse raced. Now, I need to access that equipment for a critical patient. Always so serious, Dr. Landry sighed, echoing Dr. Reynolds' frequent comment. We're just being friendly, right, guys? The other two nodded, their expressions suggesting Amelia was overreacting. My patient is waiting, she said firmly. Move aside, or I'll have to report that 3 senior doctors prevented me from accessing emergency equipment while making inappropriate comments. A tense silence followed, then Dr. Michaels laughed, though the sound held no humor. Can't even take a compliment. This is why, I'm requesting you step aside immediately, Amelia interrupted, her voice quiet but steely. My responsibility is to my patient, not your ego. Something in her unwavering gaze must have communicated her resolve, because Dr. Patel finally shrugged and moved away from the shelf. Whatever. We were leaving anyway. As they filed past her, Dr. Landry whispered, nobody likes a prude who thinks she's too good for everyone, Tyrone. Amelia retrieved the equipment with steady hands, refusing to let them see how the encounter had affected her. Only after delivering the monitor to Dr. Martinez and ensuring the patient was stabilized did she allow herself a moment alone in the staff restroom, where she gripped the edge of the sink and took several deep breaths. Her mother's voice seemed to whisper in her ear, when they try to make you small, stand tallest. By the end of her shift, Amelia had made her decision. She walked purposefully to Dr. Elizabeth Chen's office, the hospital's chief of staff, a formidable woman who had broken numerous glass ceilings throughout her 40-year career in medicine. Come in, Dr. Chen called in response to Amelia's knock. The office was austere but elegant, much like the woman behind the desk. At 65, Dr. Chen's sleek bob was more silver than black, but her sharp eyes missed nothing as she gestured for Amelia to sit. Nurse Tyrone, this is unexpected. I apologize for the interruption, Dr. Chen. Amelia's posture remained perfectly straight as she recounted the supply room incident with clinical precision, neither embellishing nor downplaying what had occurred. Dr. Chen listened without interruption, her expression unchanging. When Amelia finished, the older woman removed her glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose. You realize they'll deny everything, claim you misinterpreted their professional camaraderie? Yes, Amelia replied simply, but that doesn't change what happened. Dr. Chen studied her for a long moment. You're one of our best nurses, Tyrone, smart, dedicated, exceptional with difficult patients. Why risk making powerful enemies? With respect, Dr. Chen, I'm not the one who created this situation. And if staying silent is the price of advancement, it's too high. A hint of something, approval, perhaps, flickered across the older woman's face. Let me be blunt. The board is reluctant to discipline doctors without concrete evidence, especially ones bringing in research grants. She held up a hand when Amelia began to speak. But I believe you, and I have an alternative solution that might interest you. She slid a folder across the desk. David Peterson, yes, that Peterson, is recovering from cardiac surgery. He's requested a private nurse for his home care. The position pays triple your current salary, with accommodations provided at the Peterson estate for the 3-month recovery period. Amelia blinked, taken aback. You want me to leave? I want you to consider an exceptional opportunity while I handle this situation, Dr. Chen corrected. By the time Peterson's recovery is complete, certain personnel changes will have occurred. The board may drag their feet on explicit harassment claims, but they move quite efficiently when reminded about liability issues regarding doctors who prevent access to emergency equipment. Amelia opened the folder, scanning the details of the position. The compensation was indeed substantial, enough to help her mother move into a better apartment, pay off her remaining student loans, and still save considerably. Why me? She asked, looking up. Because Peterson specifically asked for someone unimpressed by my wealth, with impeccable credentials and, I quote, enough backbone to tell me when I'm being an ass. Dr. Chen's lips curved slightly. I thought of you immediately. For the first time since entering the office, Amelia allowed herself a small smile. I see. Take 24 hours to decide, Dr. Chen said, rising to indicate the meeting was concluding, and, Tyrone, whatever you choose, know that I expect a full incident report on my desk by tomorrow morning. Those three need to learn that actions have consequences, regardless of where you're working next month. That evening, Amelia sat on her small balcony, phone in hand, her mother on speaker as she outlined the situation. They offered you how much? Stella exclaimed after Amelia mentioned the salary. It's temporary, Mama, 3 months. References from the Petersons afterward, her mother pointed out pragmatically. Baby, doors like this don't open every day, and it sounds like Dr. Chen is giving you a graceful exit while she cleans house. Amelia sighed, watching the city lights blink on as dusk settled. It feels like I'm running away. No, Stella's voice was firm, it's advancing strategically. There's a difference. As Amelia prepared for bed, her decision crystallized. She would accept the position, but not before filing her report. Whatever awaited her at the Peterson estate, she would face it as she faced everything, with dignity intact and head held high, carrying her mother's wisdom like armor against whatever challenges came next. What she couldn't know was that the greatest challenge wouldn't come from David Peterson, but from his enigmatic son, James, a man whose reputation for careless privilege and casual relationships preceded him, but whose true nature remained hidden behind layers of carefully constructed indifference that only Amelia would eventually see beyond. Chapter 3, The Peterson Estate. The Peterson estate sprawled across 5 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds in Westlake Hills, where old money had built palatial homes on the city's most coveted ridge. Amelia's modest sedan seemed out of place as she drove through wrought iron gates that parted silently upon her arrival. She had received clearance from security after providing her credentials, yet still felt like an intruder as she followed the curved driveway toward the main house. The 3-story Georgian mansion loomed ahead, its limestone facade gleaming in the morning light, perfectly symmetrical windows reflecting the clear blue sky while ivy climbed selectively placed trellises, giving the impression that nature itself had been carefully directed where to grow. Amelia parked where instructed, a designated spot far enough from the front entrance to avoid disrupting the estate's aesthetic, yet close enough to be practical for a healthcare professional who might need to leave quickly. She straightened her blouse, checked that her braids were neatly secured, and retrieved her medical bag from the passenger seat. You must be Nurse Tyrone, called a voice as Amelia approached the entrance. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and an efficient manner stood in the open doorway. I'm Mrs. Harrington, the house manager. Mr. Peterson is expecting you. The foyer Amelia entered seemed designed to impress, with a soaring ceiling, marble floors, and a grand staircase that curved elegantly to the 2nd floor. Yet, despite its grandeur, the space felt strangely sterile, as though it existed for appearance rather than comfort. This way, please, Mrs. Harrington instructed, leading Amelia through a corridor lined with artwork that likely cost more than Amelia's entire education. Mr. Peterson requested your meeting take place in the solarium rather than his bedroom. He's determined not to be treated as an invalid. The solarium occupied the southeast corner of the house, with glass walls offering views of both the rose garden and the distant city skyline. Unlike the formal rooms they had passed, this space contained comfortable furniture and abundant plant life, a place where people actually lived rather than merely displayed their wealth. David Peterson sat in a leather chair, a tablet in hand and a stack of documents on the table beside him. At 64, his steel-gray hair and commanding presence matched the photographs Amelia had seen in business magazines. What those images hadn't captured was the pallor beneath his tan or the way his hand trembled slightly as he set down the tablet. Mr. Peterson, Nurse Amelia Tyrone has arrived, Mrs. Harrington announced. David's assessing gaze reminded Amelia of Dr. Chen, clinical, evaluating, missing nothing. Nurse Tyrone, Elizabeth speaks highly of you, says you don't suffer fools and know your medicine. Both qualities I appreciate. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Peterson," Amelia replied, setting her bag on a nearby table and removing the digital tablet containing his records. "I've reviewed your case thoroughly. Would you prefer I outline my proposed care plan now, or would you like to establish your expectations first?" A hint of approval flickered across his face. "Direct. Good. My expectations are simple: help me recover quickly, tell me the truth about my condition without sugarcoating it, and maintain your professional discretion about anything you see or hear in this house." "I can agree to all three," Amelia said with a nod, "though I should clarify that quick recovery doesn't mean cutting corners medically. Your surgery was significant, and pushing too hard too soon could lead to setbacks rather than progress." Rather than bristling at her candor, David actually smiled, a slight upward curve of his mouth that transformed his stern features momentarily. "Dr. Chen said you'd keep me honest. Now, about those care plans." For the next 40 minutes, they discussed his medication schedule, exercise restrictions, dietary requirements, and follow-up appointments. Throughout their conversation, Amelia observed his breathing, color, and energy levels, making mental notes about his condition beyond what appeared in the medical records. "Your heart rate increases when you discuss your company," she noted after he became animated explaining a pending acquisition. "We need to monitor your stress levels, especially during business calls." "Good luck with that," Mrs. Harrington murmured as she entered with a tray of tea. "Mr. Peterson considers relaxation a foreign concept." "I built Peterson Industries by working harder than everyone else, Catherine," David replied without rancor. "Old habits. And new ones will be necessary for optimal recovery," Amelia interjected smoothly. "Your heart has undergone significant trauma, it requires time to heal, just as any injured muscle would." David studied her with newfound interest. "Most people in this house hesitate to contradict me, Nurse Tyrone. I'm not employed to agree with you, Mr. Peterson. I'm employed to help you recover." He nodded slowly. "Refreshing. Catherine will show you to your quarters. I expect our first official session to begin at 2 this afternoon after my conference call with Tokyo." As Amelia followed Mrs. Harrington through the labyrinthine house, she catalogued landmarks to orient herself: a distinctive painting here, an unusual sculpture there. Her assigned suite was located in the East Wing, close enough to David's rooms for quick access, but separated enough to provide privacy. "These will be your accommodations," Mrs. Harrington said, opening double doors to reveal a sitting room appointed in soft blues and creams, with a separate bedroom and private bath beyond. "The kitchen staff serves meals at 7, 12, and 6, but you may request food at any time. Your schedule with Mr. Peterson will likely be irregular, so arrangements have been made to accommodate that." Amelia set her suitcase down, momentarily overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding her. The room was larger than her entire apartment, with windows overlooking a reflection pool where water lilies floated serenely. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrington. This is—" Her words were cut short by the distant sound of a door slamming, followed by raised voices. Mrs. Harrington's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "That would be the younger Mr. Peterson," she said with practiced neutrality. "James has recently returned from abroad." Before Amelia could respond, heavy footsteps approached, and a male voice called out, "Catherine, is my father in the solarium?" "He's resting, Mr. James," Mrs. Harrington replied as a figure appeared in the doorway. James Peterson leaned against the doorframe with casual insolence. His appearance was a stark contrast to the household's ordered precision, his dark hair slightly too long, his expensive clothes rumpled as though he'd slept in them. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, he possessed a magnetic presence that seemed to compress the air in the room. "Resting? That's new," he remarked, his gaze sliding from Mrs. Harrington to Amelia, assessing her with a glance that managed to be both dismissive and inappropriately thorough. "Ah, the nurse, another addition to my father's collection of employees. Mr. James, this is Nurse Tyrone," Mrs. Harrington began, her tone suggesting this wasn't the first time she'd managed such introductions. "Charmed, I'm sure," James drawled, making no move to extend his hand or properly introduce himself. "A word of advice, Nurse Tyrone, whatever he's paying you, it won't be worth the pound of flesh he'll demand in return." The statement hung in the air, its bitterness palpable. Amelia met his gaze directly, refusing to be unsettled. "Thank you for the concern, Mr. Peterson. However, my contract is quite specific about the services I'm providing: cardiac care and rehabilitation, nothing more." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, at her composed response. He straightened slightly, studying her with marginally more interest. "We'll see." Then he was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive cologne and the lingering impression of someone who wore his privilege like armor against genuine connection. Mrs. Harrington sighed almost imperceptibly. "Please excuse Mr. James. He and his father have a complicated relationship." "Most family relationships are," Amelia replied diplomatically. Left alone to unpack, Amelia considered the day's introductions. David Peterson was exactly as she'd expected, demanding, direct, accustomed to control. His son, however, presented a more complex puzzle. Beneath James' carefully cultivated indifference, she had glimpsed something troubling in his eyes, not merely the entitlement she'd anticipated, but a hollowness that all his wealth couldn't seem to fill. Her mother had always told her to be wary of damaged people with power. As Amelia arranged her medical supplies in precise order, she decided that James Peterson would be someone to maintain professional distance from, a resolution she would find increasingly difficult to keep in the days ahead. Chapter 4: Beneath the Surface. By her third day at the Peterson estate, Amelia had established an efficient routine. Mornings began with checking David's vitals before his 6 a.m. awakening. The man adhered to the same schedule he'd maintained for 40 years, cardiac surgery notwithstanding. She supervised his medication, monitored his supervised exercise sessions, and attended the daily briefings where David insisted on managing his business empire despite doctor's orders. "Your blood pressure spikes every time Harrison mentions the Singapore deal," Amelia noted after one particularly tense video call with David's executive team. She recorded the reading in her digital log, her expression neutral but her tone firm. "We discussed stress management, Mr. Peterson." "Impossible to avoid stress completely in my position," David replied, though he did lean back in his chair as instructed, practicing the breathing techniques she'd taught him. "Not completely, but we can implement better strategies, perhaps delegate the Singapore negotiations temporarily." David's eyebrows rose. "You understand what was being discussed?" "I understand enough," Amelia replied. "My father wasn't present in my life, but my mother made certain I received comprehensive education in finance alongside my medical training. She believed women should understand money as well as men do." "Smart woman, your mother," David observed, studying Amelia with new interest. "Most healthcare professionals zone out during these calls. My responsibility is your health, which includes understanding what affects it." She checked his pulse again. "Better now. Your next medication should be taken with food. Mrs. Harrington mentioned lunch would be served on the terrace today." As they made their way through the house, Amelia couldn't help noticing that while every surface gleamed with polish and every object appeared valuable, the space lacked the warmth of a true home. No casual family photographs adorned the walls, no books sat half-read on side tables, no evidence that people lived rather than simply resided here. The terrace overlooked an Olympic-sized swimming pool where a solitary figure cut through the water with powerful strokes. James Peterson emerged from the pool just as they were seated, water cascading from broad shoulders as he reached for a towel. Without acknowledging their presence, he dried himself perfunctorily before dropping into a lounger 20 feet away, immediately absorbed in his phone. "You might join us for lunch, James," David called, his tone making the invitation sound more like a summons. "Since you apparently have time for swimming, you must have time to eat." James didn't look up. "I have plans." "You've had plans every day since your return," David observed dryly. "Strange how none of them involve Peterson Industries." "Not strange at all," James replied, finally glancing their way. "Entirely intentional, in fact." The exchange crackled with familiar tension, a well-worn argument conducted in shorthand. Amelia focused on arranging David's medication beside his plate, providing a semblance of privacy despite her presence. "Nurse Tyrone," James called suddenly, his gaze shifting to her with unexpected intensity. "What's your professional opinion? Is my father well enough to be aggravated by family matters, or should he be spared the disappointment of his only son and heir for a few more weeks?" The question was designed to provoke, but Amelia met his gaze evenly. "My professional opinion is that moderate social interaction is beneficial for recovery, Mr. Peterson, particularly interactions that don't dramatically elevate blood pressure." James' eyebrows rose slightly, whether at her measured response or her implied criticism, she couldn't tell. "See," David said with satisfaction, "even your nurse thinks you should join the family business discussions." "Actually," Amelia interjected calmly, "I said moderate social interaction would be beneficial. I made no recommendation regarding business matters." She turned to David. "Your cardiologist specifically advised against full workdays for at least 6 weeks, Mr. Peterson. That was in the discharge paperwork you signed." A fleeting expression crossed James' face, surprise, followed by something that might have been reluctant appreciation. He stood abruptly. "Enjoy your lunch, Father. I have a flight to catch." With a mock salute to Amelia, he strode toward the house, phone already at his ear. "He wasn't always like this," David said after a long silence, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "After his mother left, things changed." Amelia maintained her professional demeanor despite her curiosity. "I understand transitions can be difficult." She steered the conversation back to safer territory. "Now, about your afternoon schedule." Later that evening, Amelia called her mother, as she did each night, settling into the window seat of her suite with a cup of chamomile tea. "The house is something from a magazine, Mama," she described, watching moonlight ripple across the reflection pool outside, "but it feels empty somehow." "Big houses often do," Stella replied. "Takes more than expensive things to make a home." "David Peterson is exactly what I expected, demanding but straightforward." "His son is," she hesitated, searching for the right word. "Handsome," her mother supplied with a knowing chuckle. "Difficult," Amelia corrected, though she couldn't deny James possessed a certain magnetism despite his attitude. "Deliberately so, I think, like he's determined to fulfill every expectation of the privileged playboy." "People wear masks for protection, baby, you know that better than most. Remember how you used to hide behind those big books after your father left? Your mask was being the serious little girl who didn't need anyone. This is different, Mama. James Peterson isn't hiding insecurity, he's flaunting disregard for his father's health, for his family's legacy, for himself." "Maybe," Stella suggested gently, "sometimes the people who seem to care least actually care too much to risk showing it." Amelia was still considering her mother's words an hour later as she completed her evening rounds, checking David's vitals one final time before retiring. Walking back through the dimly lit corridor, she paused at the sound of glass breaking, followed by a muffled curse. The noise came from a room she hadn't entered before, a darkened study where moonlight spilled through tall windows, illuminating a figure hunched over a desk. James sat with his head in his hands, an overturned whiskey glass and spreading puddle on the antique wood beside him. Amelia hesitated, about to withdraw quietly, when he looked up. Their eyes met, and for an unguarded moment, his face revealed something raw and vulnerable that made her breath catch. Then, like a shutter closing, his expression hardened into familiar disdain. "Come to check if the prodigal son is disrupting the patient's rest?" he asked, his voice carrying a brittle edge. "I heard glass breaking," Amelia replied simply. "Medical instinct to investigate potential injuries." James gestured to the spilled drink with exaggerated flourish. "Just wounded pride and expensive scotch, Nurse Tyrone, nothing requiring your professional attention." She should have left then, everything about the situation screamed private moment, not medical emergency. Instead, surprising herself, Amelia crossed to the sideboard where a pitcher of water stood. "Hydration helps prevent the worst effects of alcohol," she said, pouring a glass and setting it before him with clinical precision. "And nightmares?" His head snapped up. Your father mentioned you returned from Tokyo 2 days ago, that's an 11-hour time difference. Sleep disturbances are common, often manifesting as vivid dreams or nightmares. She spoke matter-of-factly, offering scientific explanation rather than sympathy, sensing the latter would be rejected outright. James studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he reached for the water. Is there anything you don't analyze with clinical detachment, Nurse Tyrone? Many things, she replied honestly, but right now, I'm on duty. Always the professional. Do you ever stop being Nurse Tyrone, let down that perfect composure and just be Amelia? The way he said her name, the first time he'd used it, sent an unexpected ripple of awareness through her. Good night, Mr. Peterson. The kitchen keeps ginger tea in the left cabinet, it helps with jet lag better than whiskey. As she turned to leave, his voice followed her, softer than before. Amelia. She paused at the threshold without looking back. Thank you, for not mentioning this to my father. The vulnerability in those words hung in the air between them, a momentary bridge across their different worlds. Without turning, she nodded once, continuing down the corridor with measured steps that betrayed none of her inner confusion. That night, lying awake in her luxurious but unfamiliar bed, Amelia found herself revisiting the moment, the moonlight on James' face, the unguarded pain in his eyes before his defenses rose again, the way her name had sounded in his voice. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, sometimes the people who seem to care least actually care too much to risk showing it. Perhaps beneath James Peterson's carefully cultivated indifference lay something more complex than she had initially assumed, depths that his wealth and privilege had never taught him to navigate safely. The revelation was unwelcome, disrupting the professional distance she had intended to maintain. It was always easier to keep your composure around people who fit neatly into categories, patient, colleague, superior, but James Peterson, with his contradictions and glimpses of unexpected vulnerability, defied such simple classification, making him far more dangerous to Amelia's carefully ordered world than she cared to admit. Chapter 5, The Night That Changed Everything. 2 weeks into her position at the Peterson estate, Amelia had settled into a rhythm, balancing David's care with maintaining professional boundaries. The initial awkwardness following her late-night encounter with James had gradually subsided into polite, distant interactions when their paths crossed, which happened with increasing frequency as James inexplicably spent more time at the estate. Today, David was preparing to attend his first public function since the surgery, a charity gala where the Peterson Foundation would announce a significant endowment. Though Amelia had advised against it, his cardiologist had reluctantly approved a brief appearance, provided David limit himself to 1 hour. I built this foundation 30 years ago, David said as Amelia checked his blood pressure. Missing the annual gala would start rumors about my health that could affect stock prices. Your health should be more important than stock prices, Mr. Peterson. After completing her notes on David's pre-event vitals, Amelia began gathering her belongings. With both Petersons absent, she planned to use the evening to catch up on continuing education credits. You're leaving? Mrs. Harrington asked, noticing Amelia's preparations. I assumed Mr. Peterson wouldn't need me while he's out with you as his escort, Amelia explained. Nonsense, David interjected. Your contract includes residence here, specifically for emergencies. I expect you to remain on site. After they departed, Amelia had just settled in her suite when a knock interrupted her concentration. James stood in the hallway, dressed in jeans and a simple gray Henley. Mr. Peterson, she acknowledged. I thought you had dinner plans. Had, he confirmed. The house is empty except for us. You've been working consecutive shifts for 2 weeks, go home, Amelia. Whatever my father's paying you, it doesn't include surrendering your entire life to this mausoleum. The use of her first name, combined with what appeared to be genuine concern, caught her off guard. I don't mind staying, but you don't need to, he insisted. Father won't return for hours, and I'm perfectly capable of calling you if there's an emergency. 20 minutes later, Amelia had packed an overnight bag but stopped before reaching her car, the same intuition that had saved patients when monitors showed no cause for concern. She stood in the driveway, looking back at the illuminated mansion against the darkening sky. "You're being ridiculous," she told herself. "Go home." Yet something kept her rooted in place. With a sigh, she turned and walked back inside. The house was quiet as she re-entered. She made her way to the media room where James had said he'd be, intending to let him know she'd changed her mind about leaving. The room was empty, a half-eaten sandwich and untouched drink abandoned on the coffee table. Amelia was about to leave when a strange sound reached her, a gasping wheeze, followed by something heavy hitting the floor in the adjacent kitchen. She rushed through the connecting door to find James collapsed on the marble tiles, his face alarmingly swollen, lips blue-tinged as he struggled to breathe. Anaphylaxis, Amelia diagnosed instantly, dropping to her knees beside him. "James, do you have an EpiPen? Where is it?" His eyes widened in recognition, one hand weakly gesturing toward the second floor. "I'm calling an ambulance, but we can't wait," she said, already dialing with one hand while checking his pulse with the other. "I need to get your epinephrine. I'll be right back." Amelia sprinted through the house to James' bedroom, a space unexpectedly austere compared to the rest of the house, with monochromatic furnishings and bookshelves filled with well-worn volumes. In the en-suite bathroom's medicine cabinet, she found an insulated case containing 2 EpiPens. Back downstairs in under a minute, she found James' condition deteriorating rapidly. "I'm administering epinephrine," she told him, pressing the injector firmly against his outer thigh for 3 seconds. "Help is coming," she said, maintaining the calm tone that had steadied countless patients. "The epinephrine will work quickly, try to stay with me, James." As if in response, his next breath came marginally easier. Amelia elevated his legs using cushions, continuing to monitor his vital signs. When his eyes flickered open, focusing with difficulty on her face, Amelia felt relief wash through her with startling intensity. "You came back," he managed, the words barely audible. "I forgot my charger," she replied with a small smile. "What triggered this?" "Sandwich, sesame seed bun," he whispered. "Kitchen staff, knew." In the ambulance, James drifted in and out of consciousness as the paramedics administered additional medication. Amelia maintained physical contact throughout the journey, her hand on his arm, a tether to consciousness. At the hospital, she provided his medical history to the attending physician, then stepped back as the emergency team took over. Only then did the full impact of what had nearly happened hit her. She sank into a waiting room chair, suddenly aware of her own racing heart. Hours passed in the sterile hospital corridor. She called David, interrupting the gala. She coordinated with Mrs. Harrington about retrieving necessary items from James' room. She checked regularly with the medical team. What she didn't do was leave. Dawn was breaking when James was moved from emergency to a private room. Amelia stood in the doorway, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. As if sensing her presence, his eyes opened, finding hers across the room with surprising clarity. "You stayed," he said, his voice hoarse but stronger. Amelia moved to his bedside, automatically checking the monitors. "Of course I stayed. It's my job." "No," James replied, holding her gaze, "your job is looking after my father." This was something else. The moment stretched between them, weighted with implications neither was prepared to address. Finally, Amelia adjusted his foreline, a deliberately professional gesture. "You should rest. Your body's been through significant trauma." "Amelia," he caught her wrist as she turned to leave, his touch light but arresting. "Thank you, for coming back, for knowing what to do, for staying." The simple sincerity in his voice stripped away the last of her professional distance. For the first time since arriving at the Peterson estate, she allowed herself to see James not as the difficult son of her patient or the entitled playboy, but simply as a man, one whose life had nearly ended hours before, one whose relieved gaze now held something that made her pulse quicken. "Get some sleep, James," she said softly. "I'll be here when you wake up." As she settled into the chair beside his bed, Amelia knew it signified something more profound than professional obligation. In the space of one harrowing night, everything had changed, boundaries crossed, assumptions challenged, and connections forged that could never be undone. Chapter 6, New Eyes. 3 days after his anaphylactic episode, James returned to the Peterson estate with discharge instructions Amelia had memorized more thoroughly than he had. Though technically still assigned to David's care, she found herself dividing her attention between father and son, a situation David himself encouraged with surprising enthusiasm. "He actually took his antihistamines without argument when you reminded him," David remarked over breakfast. "The hospital staff said he was a nightmare patient until you arrived." Each morning, Amelia maintained her professional expression. Medical compliance often improves with consistent care providers. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" David's eyes held a knowing gleam. Later that afternoon, Amelia found James in the solarium, laptop open, but attention focused on the garden beyond the glass walls. He wore reading glasses, something she'd never seen before, giving him an unexpectedly scholarly appearance. "Your father's calling a board meeting in 30 minutes, she informed him, setting his medication on the table. "He asked if you'll be joining remotely or in person." James removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "In person, I suppose. Can't have the old man getting too excited trying to explain quarterly projections." The consideration behind the complaint wasn't lost on Amelia. Since his hospitalization, she'd noticed subtle shifts in James' behavior toward his father, still marked by friction, but tempered with moments of genuine concern. "These need to be taken with food," she reminded him, placing a small plate beside the pills. "Playing nurse to both Petersons now?" James asked, though the question lacked his former bite. "Just ensuring the considerable investment in your medical care doesn't go to waste," she replied, turning to leave. "Amelia," he called, stopping her. "Would you stay a moment?" The request held none of his usual commanding tone. Curious despite herself, Amelia settled into a chair across from him. "Is there something you need?" James studied her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of every detail of her appearance. "Why nursing?" he asked abruptly. "With your intelligence, you could have chosen any number of more lucrative professions." "Not everything is about money, Mr. Peterson, James," he corrected. "After saving my life and spending 3 nights in an uncomfortable hospital chair, I think you've earned first-name basis." "Why nursing, Amelia?" he repeated, softer now. She considered deflecting again, but something in his genuine curiosity made her answer honestly. "My grandmother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer when I was 14. The doctors were clinical, focused on treatment protocols and statistics, but there was a nurse, Eliza, who saw beyond the disease to the person. She taught me that healing isn't just about medicine, it's about preserving dignity through vulnerability." When she died, my grandmother was holding Eliza's hand, not a doctor's. James absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. "And the financial education, your mother's influence, you said?" "My mother cleaned offices at an investment firm after my father left. Instead of leaving me with sitters she couldn't afford, she'd take me along. One of the analysts started giving me math problems to solve while I waited. By 16, I was helping my mother manage a modest portfolio that eventually paid for my nursing school, hence my understanding of the Singapore acquisition discussion." "I understand the principles, if not all the specifics," she acknowledged. "Finance can be learned, compassion is harder to acquire." Something shifted in James' expression. "You think I lack compassion?" It wasn't a question, but Amelia answered as if it were. "I think wealth can insulate people from experiences that foster compassion. It's not a judgment, just an observation." "What else have you observed about me?" James leaned forward. "I'm curious what conclusions your clinical eye has drawn. That you're intelligent but deliberately underperform to lower expectations, that you use indifference as a shield against disappointment, that your relationship with your father is complicated by events you never discuss." She hesitated before adding, "and that your bedroom contains more classic literature than I'd have expected from someone who cultivates a careless playboy image." A startled laugh escaped him. "Caught during your emergency raid for the EpiPen? Should I be concerned about what else you noticed while saving my life?" That despite having the financial resources for the latest in everything, you keep a photograph of a woman, I assume is your mother, on your nightstand in a frame that's been repaired rather than replaced. James' amusement faded, replaced by a guarded expression that made Amelia regret her words immediately. I apologize, she said quickly. That was intrusive. No, he replied after a pause, it was accurate. He picked up his medication, swallowing it before continuing. My mother left when I was 12, Australia, new husband, new children. The frame broke during one of my father's attempts to remove her photograph from my room. I glued it back together. The simple statement revealed more about the Peterson family dynamics than hours of observation had. Amelia felt a sudden ache of recognition, a child desperately preserving connections to an absent parent. My father sent me a birthday card when I turned 13, she offered quietly, the only acknowledgement I ever received from him. I kept it until the paper wore thin at the folds. James met her gaze, a moment of shared understanding passing between them that transcended their different circumstances. For the first time, Amelia saw him clearly, not as David Peterson's difficult son or as the entitled heir to a fortune, but as someone shaped by the same fundamental human experiences of loss and longing that had formed her own character. We should head to the office, she said finally, rising. Your father will be waiting. As May approached, these conversations became routine, moments stolen between David's care schedule and James' gradually increasing involvement in Peterson Industries. Sometimes they discussed books, other times business strategies, occasionally more personal matters. He built it selling cheap lumber to developers after World War II, James explained one evening as they walked the estate grounds. My father transformed it into a global corporation. Everyone expects me to take it further, but you have reservations, she supplied when he trailed off. The methods that built our fortune wouldn't be acceptable today, he said. Clear-cutting forests, exploiting regulatory loopholes, aggressive acquisition tactics that destroyed smaller businesses. My father sees adaptation to ethical standards as necessary public relations, I see it as fundamental to the company's future. Have you told him this? James laughed without humor. Repeatedly. He hears criticism of his life's work, not vision for sustainable growth. It's easier to play the irresponsible heir than fight battles I can't win. So you sabotage yourself instead, Amelia challenged. That seems like surrender, not strategy. He studied her with newfound interest. Most people in my life either agree with everything I say or dismiss me entirely, you do neither. Would you prefer false agreement, she asked. No, he replied thoughtfully, I prefer truth, even when uncomfortable. Amelia couldn't ignore the evolution occurring, not just in James, but in herself. The professional distance she prided herself on maintaining had subtly eroded, replaced by something she hesitated to name. What happens after next week? James asked one evening as darkness fell around them, when my father's condition no longer requires full-time care. The question acknowledged the inevitable conclusion of her assignment, and the uncertain future of whatever was developing between them. I don't know, Amelia admitted, the honesty both frightening and liberating. This wasn't in any care plan I developed. What she couldn't articulate, even to herself, was the fear underlying her uncertainty, not of professional impropriety or cultural differences, but of recognizing that somewhere between saving James' life and seeing the person behind his carefully constructed facade, Amelia Tyrone had begun to care for someone in a way that threatened the self-sufficiency she had built her identity upon, and that, more than any external complication, was what truly terrified her. Chapter 7, Unexpected Feelings. The Peterson Industries quarterly executive meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp in the downtown headquarters. 10 weeks after his surgery, David insisted on attending in person, his first appearance since the procedure. After reviewing his cardiac stress test results and consulting with Dr. Winters, Amelia reluctantly agreed, on the condition that she accompany him. Unnecessary, David grumbled as they rode the elevator to the executive floor, though he had acquiesced surprisingly easily. Executives in impeccable suits rose when David entered the boardroom, their expressions carefully balanced between deference and assessment. Amelia positioned herself unobtrusively against the wall, medical bag at her feet. The meeting proceeded efficiently until the boardroom door opened mid-presentation and James entered. Collective surprise rippled through the room. While James held the title of Executive Vice President, his attendance at routine meetings had been sporadic at best. Today, however, he wore a perfectly tailored suit, his usually casual hair styled with deliberate care, tablet in hand. "Apologies for the delay," he said, taking the vacant chair at his father's right. "Traffic accident on the bridge." For the next hour, Amelia witnessed something remarkable, James functioning not as the reluctant heir, but as a knowledgeable executive with unexpected command of international markets and sustainability metrics. He challenged assumptions and offered alternative approaches that clearly surprised everyone present, his father most of all. During a brief recess, David approached where Amelia stood. "Did you know about this?" he asked quietly, nodding toward James, who was engaged in conversation with two senior executives. "About what, specifically, Mr. Peterson?" "My son, actually prepared, actually engaged." David's tone held equal parts suspicion and hope. "He's attended 3 meetings this week, requested full access to the environmental impact studies for our Pacific Rim projects." Amelia maintained her professional demeanor despite her private satisfaction. "Perhaps your medical situation provided perspective on what matters to him." David studied her with shrewd assessment. "Perhaps, or perhaps other factors have motivated this change." The meeting reconvened before Amelia could formulate a suitably neutral response to his implication. For the remaining 2 hours, she observed the subtle dynamics unfolding, James' growing confidence as his contributions were acknowledged, David's gradual shift from skepticism to cautious approval, and the executive team's recalibration as they processed this unexpected development. When the meeting concluded, James approached Amelia while his father was occupied with the CFO. "Well, how did I do?" he asked, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "That's hardly for me to judge, Mr. Peterson," she replied, though she couldn't entirely suppress a small smile. "Your father seems impressed." "Not the evaluation I was seeking," James said, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that had become increasingly familiar, "but I'll take it as a start." Later that evening, the Peterson estate bustled with unexpected activity as James hosted several executives for an informal strategy session. Amelia, ensuring David took his evening medication, observed the transformation of the usually quiet house with private amazement. "He's never used the home office for actual work before," David commented, watching his son lead the group through the corridor. "Always claimed the atmosphere stifled creative thinking." "People change," Amelia said simply. "Some faster than others," David replied with a knowing look that made her uncomfortably aware of her own shifting feelings. The next morning, Amelia was completing David's therapy session when Mrs. Harrington appeared at the door, her expression unusually flustered. "Miss Madison Pierce has arrived unannounced," she announced with barely concealed disapproval. "She's insisting on seeing Mr. James." David sighed. "Madison Pierce, daughter of Senator Pierce, occasional companion of my son between his more exotic pursuits." Before Amelia could respond, the sound of an argument drifted from downstairs, a woman's voice, cultured but raised in obvious irritation, followed by James' deeper tones. "Perhaps we should continue your exercises on the terrace," Amelia suggested to David, attempting to provide privacy for what was clearly a personal matter. "Nonsense," David replied with unexpected relish. "My prescribed walking route takes us directly past the main foyer, doctor's orders, correct?" As they descended the stairs, the confrontation came into full view. Madison Pierce, willowy, blonde, and impeccably dressed in designer casual wear, stood with arms crossed, her perfect features arranged in practiced displeasure. James faced her, his stance defensive but restrained. 3 weeks, James, 3 weeks without a single call, and suddenly you're too busy with meetings to join the Sinclair's yacht party?" Madison was saying as they approached. "Everyone's talking about it. My father asked if we'd broken up, and I had no idea what to tell him." "Perhaps that we were never together in any formal sense," James replied with remarkable patience. "We've accompanied each other to social functions, that's hardly a commitment." Madison's gaze shifted, noticing David and Amelia's approach. Her expression immediately transformed into a gracious smile. "David, darling, you look wonderful, recovery must be going splendidly." David acknowledged her with minimal enthusiasm. "Unexpected visit. Just trying to rescue your son from his sudden attack of corporate responsibility," she laughed, though it didn't reach her eyes. Her attention turned to Amelia, assessing her with a quick, dismissive glance. "And you must be the nurse, Amelia, is it? James mentioned you were dedicated." Something in her tone transformed the word into an insinuation. "Miss Tyrone has been instrumental in my recovery," David stated firmly. Madison's smile remained fixed as she turned back to James. "Perhaps your nurse could enlighten me on what's so pressing that you've ghosted your entire social circle. Surely patient care doesn't require 24-hour devotion after all this time." James' expression hardened. "That's enough, Madison. What I'm simply asking, you're implying something inappropriate about a healthcare professional who saved my life," James interrupted, his voice quiet but intense. "And I won't allow it." Madison stepped back, genuine surprise replacing her practiced poise. "My God, it's true then." "What's true?" James asked wearily. "Caroline said you were different since your medical incident, that you'd been seen at corporate headquarters, missing charity galas." Her eyes narrowed as she looked between James and Amelia. "But it's more than that, isn't it? You've actually fallen for your father's nurse." The accusation hung in the air. Amelia felt her professional composure threatening to crack under the scrutiny of three pairs of eyes, Madison's coldly assessing, David's calculatingly observant, and James, filled with something unreadable but intense. "Miss Pierce," Amelia began, determined to diffuse the situation professionally, "Mr. Peterson's recovery requires structure and consistency. His son has been supportive of that regimen, which naturally impacts his previous social schedule." "How diplomatic," Madison replied with false sweetness. "Well, don't let me disrupt the regimen." She turned to James, her voice dropping. "When you're finished playing corporate reformer with your new inspiration, you know where to find me." After her departure, an uncomfortable silence descended. David, displaying unexpected tact, excused himself to take a business call, leaving James and Amelia alone in the foyer. "I apologize for that," James said finally. "Madison has always had a talent for creating scenes." "No apology necessary," Amelia replied, maintaining her professional tone despite the turmoil beneath. "It's not uncommon for a patient's recovery to affect family dynamics." "Is that what this is to you, a clinical observation of family dynamics?" James asked, stepping closer. "Because what just happened felt considerably more personal than professional." Amelia met his gaze directly. "What I think doesn't matter, what matters is maintaining appropriate boundaries while I'm employed here." "And after?" The question was barely above a whisper. Before she could answer, David called from his study, requesting assistance with his oxygen levels after the unexpected stress. The moment shattered, leaving Amelia to retreat into her professional role while James watched her go, his expression revealing more than he had ever verbally acknowledged about his unexpected feelings for the woman who had saved more than just his physical life. Chapter 8, The Proposition. 2 months into Amelia's assignment at the Peterson estate, David's recovery had progressed remarkably. His stamina had improved to the point where he now spent 3 days a week at corporate headquarters, his medication had been reduced, and his latest echocardiogram showed significant healing. Dr. Winters had expressed satisfaction bordering on amazement during their last follow-up appointment. "Whatever you're doing, Nurse Tyrone, keep doing it," he had said, reviewing David's results. "I rarely see such consistent progress in patients this age, especially those determined to ignore half my instructions." David had merely smiled. "Good genes and better nursing care. When can I resume my full schedule?" On the drive back to the estate, David had been unusually contemplative. "You know, Nurse Tyrone, I've been observing James these past weeks. The transformation is remarkable, he's found his own motivation." Amelia had replied carefully, "Indeed." David's shrewd gaze had studied her profile. "And I believe I understand the source of that motivation." The Peterson legacy requires both business acumen and personal stability to flourish. James finally seems to have found both. That question now occupied Amelia's thoughts as she updated her patient notes in the estate's sunlit kitchen. The original 3-month timeline would conclude in just 4 weeks, and David's improvement suggested he might not require full-time care much longer. The realization should have brought professional satisfaction. Instead, it filled her with an unsettling mixture of emotions she refused to examine too closely. "Coffee?" Mrs. Harrington offered, interrupting her thoughts. "You've been staring at that tablet for 10 minutes without typing a word." Amelia accepted the cup gratefully. "Just finalizing Mr. Peterson's progress report." The house manager's noncommittal response conveyed volumes. After weeks of working alongside Amelia, Mrs. Harrington had developed a disconcerting ability to see beyond her professional facade. "Mr. Peterson is in his study with Mr. James. They've been discussing the Brazil acquisition for nearly 2 hours without raising voices, something of a household record." The observation brought an involuntary smile to Amelia's lips. The evolution in the Peterson men's relationship had been subtle but unmistakable. James now regularly attended corporate meetings, often presenting alternative approaches that emphasized long-term sustainability over immediate profits. David, surprisingly, had begun listening to these proposals with increasing openness. "Mr. James seems different these days," Mrs. Harrington ventured, the casual observation belied by her shrewd gaze. "Recovery often affects entire family systems," Amelia replied with practiced neutrality. "Medical crises can realign priorities." Indeed, though some changes seem more specifically influenced. Before Amelia could formulate a suitable response, the study door opened down the hall. She gathered her materials quickly, preparing to retreat to more neutral territory, but David's voice stopped her. "Nurse Tyrone, join us for a moment." The study reflected David's personality perfectly, organized, imposing, every object selected for significance rather than aesthetics. James stood by the window, his posture tense in a way Amelia had learned to recognize as discomfort rather than anger. "We've been discussing my return to full corporate responsibilities," David explained, gesturing for Amelia to sit. "Dr. Winters believes another month of monitoring would be prudent but agrees I no longer require around-the-clock nursing care." "That's excellent news," Amelia said, ignoring the hollow sensation beneath her professional response. "Your recovery has exceeded initial projections, due in large part to your care," David acknowledged with uncharacteristic warmth, "which brings me to a proposition I was just discussing with my son." James' expression tightened further. "Father, hear me out," David interrupted, holding up one hand. "Peterson Industries faces significant transitions in the coming years. My health situation, while improving, has emphasized the importance of secure succession planning." Amelia glanced between them, uncertain where this corporate discussion was leading or why it required her presence. "James has demonstrated unexpected commitment these past weeks," David continued. "The board has noticed, I've noticed." His gaze settled on Amelia with uncomfortable directness. "And I've observed the catalyst for this transformation." Understanding dawned with chilling clarity. Amelia maintained her composure through sheer professional discipline. "A permanent arrangement would benefit all parties," David stated matter-of-factly. "James clearly respects your intelligence and judgment. You've proven your discretion and integrity. The Peterson name carries significant influence, and the family requires someone with both backbone and grace to carry it forward." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I've watched how you handle difficult situations with dignity, how you've stood up to me when necessary. The board members have noticed your influence on James. Even Harrison mentioned how impressed he was with your grasp of our Southeast Asian market concerns." The clinical assessment of her suitability as a potential Peterson bride struck Amelia like a physical blow. She had faced objectification before, had developed defenses against the reduction of her person to her appearance or utility, but this calm evaluation of her qualities as a corporate asset left her momentarily speechless. "James, this discussion is over," he said, his voice low with controlled anger. "Amelia isn't a commodity to be acquired because she's proven valuable. I meant no offense, David said, appearing genuinely surprised by their reactions. I'm simply acknowledging reality. You've changed since she arrived, the company benefits from that change. Formalizing the connection seems logical. Logic has nothing to do with it, James replied sharply. This isn't the 18th century, you don't get to arrange marriages to consolidate business interests. Amelia found her voice at last. While I appreciate your confidence in my ability, Mr. Peterson, my professional relationship with your family concludes when my contract ends. Any suggestion of other arrangements is inappropriate. See, James gestured toward her with something like pride, this is exactly why your proposition is absurd. Amelia deserves better than a calculated alliance with our dysfunctional family. The defense, while well-intentioned, stung in its own way. Amelia stood, reclaiming her professional distance with effort. I should check your midday readings, Mr. Peterson, and I believe James has a conference call scheduled. Of course, David nodded, apparently untroubled by their reaction to his suggestion. We'll revisit your contract extension next week. In the hallway, James caught up to Amelia, his expression apologetic. I'm sorry about that. He means well, in his emotionally stunted way. There's no need to apologize, she replied, striving for a neutrality she didn't feel. Your father views everything through a pragmatic lens. That's a diplomatic way of describing his complete disregard for normal human feelings. James ran a hand through his hair in frustration. For what it's worth, I told him the idea was inappropriate before you arrived. Because I'm your father's nurse, or because I'm not suitable for the Peterson name? The question escaped before she could contain it. James stared at her, genuine shock replacing his irritation. Because you deserve to be valued for yourself, not for what you might contribute to a corporate legacy. Because relationships should develop naturally, not through parental manipulation. His voice softened. And because if anything ever happened between us, I'd want it to be real, not arranged. The hypothetical, if, hung between them, transforming the corridor's air into something electric with unacknowledged possibilities. Before either could navigate this dangerous terrain, the sharp ring of the doorbell interrupted the moment. Mrs. Harrington's voice floated from the foyer, followed by an unfamiliar female voice that nonetheless caused James to freeze. His expression transformed to something Amelia had never witnessed before, a combination of disbelief and old pain that made him suddenly look younger, more vulnerable. That's not possible, he whispered. She's in Australia, she's been in Australia for 20 years. Then the visitor appeared at the end of the hallway, a slender woman in her 60s, elegantly dressed, with James' unmistakable eyes and bearing. Elaine Peterson had returned to the family she'd abandoned, her timing as impeccable as it was devastating. Hello, darling, she said to her son, her cultured voice carrying down the corridor. Aren't you going to welcome your mother home? Chapter 9, The Matriarch Returns. Time seemed to crystallize in the hallway of the Peterson estate. James stood motionless, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and something more complex as he faced the mother who had abandoned him 2 decades earlier. Amelia instinctively stepped back, recognizing a moment too private for witnesses. Mother, James finally said, the single word carrying the weight of 20 years of absence. This is unexpected. Elaine Peterson moved forward with practiced grace, designer heels clicking purposefully on the marble floor. Darling, you look tired, and your hair needs attention. She reached as if to touch his face, but James subtly shifted beyond her reach. What are you doing here? He asked, his voice controlled but taut with tension. A mother needs reasons to visit her son. Elaine's gaze drifted past him to Amelia, assessing her with cool precision. And who might this be? Before either could respond, David appeared in the study doorway, his expression hardening at the sight of his ex-wife. Elaine, the courtesy of advance notice continues to elude you. David, she acknowledged him with a slight nod, you're looking recovered. I received the Family Foundation's notification about your surgery. Naturally, I was concerned. Naturally, David echoed with evident skepticism, after 2 decades of radio silence. The tension thickened palpably. Amelia began a discreet retreat, but Elaine's voice stopped her. "You haven't introduced your staff, David." "This is Nurse Tyrone," James interjected before his father could respond. "She's been instrumental in Father's recovery." Elaine's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "A live-in nurse, how progressive of you, David." "Miss Tyrone is a highly qualified healthcare professional recommended by Dr. Chin herself," David replied, his tone warning against further comment. Elaine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "How fortunate you found someone so dedicated. Will you join us for lunch, Miss Tyrone? I'm eager to hear about my ex-husband's progress." "I have reports to complete, but thank you," Amelia replied with professional courtesy, recognizing the dismissal beneath the invitation. "Mr. Peterson, I'll check your readings at 2 as scheduled." As she walked away, Amelia heard Elaine's voice drop to a stage whisper. "Really, David, there must be facility options that don't require housing medical staff in the family residence." The remainder of the day unfolded in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers as the Peterson family navigated Elaine's unexpected return. Amelia maintained her professional routine while minimizing her presence in family spaces, acutely aware of the charged atmosphere. Mrs. Harrington's tight expression and the staff's hushed conversations confirmed that Elaine's return had disrupted more than just James' composure. Shortly before dinner, Amelia was recording David's evening vitals when Elaine appeared in the doorway of his suite. "Still monitoring every breath, I see," she observed with manufactured pleasantness. "David, darling, might I have a private word with Miss Tyrone?" David glanced between them, frowning. "Amelia is completing my medical checks, which can surely wait 5 minutes, Elaine insisted, her tone professional, too professional. After an uncomfortable pause, David nodded reluctantly. "I'll review those quarterly reports." James left. 5 minutes, Elaine." When they were alone, Elaine's demeanor transformed instantly. "Let's dispense with pleasantries, Miss Tyrone. I understand you've made yourself quite indispensable during my absence." "I've provided the medical care Mr. Peterson required," Amelia replied evenly. "And apparently much more." Elaine moved further into the room, her expensive perfume filling the space. "Catherine mentioned the charming arrangement David proposed earlier, quite the opportunity for someone of your background." The implication was unmistakable. Amelia met the older woman's gaze directly. "There is no arrangement, Mrs. Peterson. Your ex-husband made an inappropriate suggestion that was immediately declined." How refreshingly principled. Elaine's skepticism was palpable, or perhaps strategic. Refusing immediately only increases your perceived value. "I don't require validation of my worth from the Peterson family," Amelia stated, maintaining her composure. "My contract concludes in 4 weeks, after which I'll return to Metropolitan Hospital." Elaine studied her with cold calculation. "My son has always had a weakness for rescue projects, first injured animals, then damaged people. His last girlfriend was a recovering addict, a sculptor from Barcelona with fascinating track marks and tedious political opinions." "If you're implying, I'm stating facts, Miss Tyrone," Elaine interrupted smoothly. "James becomes temporarily infatuated with people who represent something missing in his privileged life, authenticity, struggle, whatever narrative he's constructed about you, dedicated healer, woman of principle. It follows his pattern. He'll move on once the novelty fades." The assessment, delivered with clinical detachment, struck uncomfortably close to fears Amelia had carefully avoided examining. Before she could respond, James' voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." He stood in the doorway, his expression a carefully controlled mask of anger. "You lost the right to analyze my relationships when you walked out, Mother." Elaine turned, unfazed by her son's anger. "Darling, I'm merely having a professional conversation with your father's nurse." "No, you're doing what you've always done, asserting control through elegant cruelty." James moved to stand beside Amelia, his proximity a clear statement. "Miss Tyrone isn't a rescue project or a passing infatuation, she saved my life." The air in the room seemed to vibrate with unspoken emotion. Amelia maintained her professional demeanor despite the rush of feelings James' defense evoked. "James," she said quietly, "this is unnecessary." "It's entirely necessary," he countered, gaze fixed on his mother. 20 years ago, I wasn't strong enough to confront your toxic behavior, I am now." Elaine's expression hardened momentarily before settling into practiced poise. "I see this conversation is pointless while you're in this state. We'll speak when you're more rational, darling." As she turned to leave, David appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "I heard enough, Elaine. Your rooms are in the West Wing, as far from mine as structurally possible. I suggest you use them until we discuss your unexpected return and apparent opinions about my household." "Our household, technically," Elaine corrected with deadly precision. "The divorce settlement gave me continued ownership interest, if you recall, perhaps that's worth revisiting during my stay." After her departure, a heavy silence descended. David glanced between James and Amelia, his expression softening marginally. "I apologize for that spectacle, Nurse Tyrone. Elaine's social graces have always been selectively applied." "No apology necessary," Amelia replied automatically. "I'll speak with her," James stated, his voice tightly controlled. "This won't happen again." "I've handled far worse in hospital settings," Amelia assured them both, desperate to restore professional distance after the emotionally charged confrontation. "If you'll excuse me, I should complete my evening rounds." Later, alone in her suite, Amelia finally allowed herself to process the day's events. Elaine Peterson's return had instantly transformed the household dynamics, exposing fault lines and vulnerabilities in the family structure. More disturbingly, it had forced into the open feelings that Amelia had carefully contained behind professional boundaries. James' defense had revealed more than his anger at his mother's behavior, it had confirmed what Amelia had been reluctant to acknowledge: whatever was developing between them had progressed beyond professional appreciation or casual attraction into something far more dangerous to her carefully ordered life. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the door, James stood in the hallway, his earlier anger replaced by quiet determination. "We need to talk," he said simply, "about what happens next." Chapter 10, Midnight Confessions. "This isn't an appropriate time," Amelia said, though she stepped aside to allow James into her suite. Professional boundaries demanded privacy for difficult conversations, even as those same boundaries made this entire situation precarious. James entered but remained near the door, respecting the invisible line between them. "If we wait for appropriate timing in this household, we'll never speak honestly." The moonlight streaming through the windows cast half his face in shadow, a fitting visual for the man she'd come to know, part privilege, part vulnerability, part carefully constructed facade, part authentic feeling. "Your mother's return has been stressful," Amelia acknowledged, maintaining professional distance. "Family dynamics often resurface during times of transition." "Don't do that," James said quietly. "Don't retreat into clinical analysis, not with me." The simple request dismantled her defenses more effectively than any confrontation could have. Amelia moved to the window seat, putting space between them while acknowledging the conversation couldn't be avoided. "What do you want me to say, James? That your mother's assessment bothered me, that I've questioned my own professional judgment for allowing personal feelings to develop, that I'm counting the days until my contract ends because maintaining boundaries has become increasingly difficult." The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than she had intended. "I want you to be honest," he replied, "about what's happening between us." Amelia looked out at the moonlit gardens, gathering her thoughts. "What's happening is temporary, a consequence of proximity during an emotionally charged situation. Your father's illness, your allergic reaction, crisis creates false intimacy. Is that what you believe, or what's safer to believe?" His perception unsettled her. Amelia had always prided herself on clear-eyed assessment of situations, yet James had developed an unnerving ability to see past her professional composure to the uncertainties beneath. "Both, perhaps," she admitted finally. "My mother warned me about this, becoming emotionally entangled with patients or their families." "I'm not your patient." "No, but your father is, which creates ethical complications." James crossed to the opposite end of the window seat, close enough for conversation, but maintaining respectful distance. In 4 weeks, he won't be. Where does that leave us? In entirely different worlds, Amelia replied, voicing the practical reality she couldn't ignore. You're the heir to Peterson Industries, I'm a nurse returning to hospital shifts. That's circumstance, not essence, James countered. If we're reducing ourselves to roles, we're no better than my mother with her outdated prejudices. Her concerns aren't entirely unfounded, Amelia said, surprising herself with the admission. Your interest in me developed during a period of personal transformation. What happens when that evolution stabilizes, when I'm no longer a catalyst but simply a woman with a very different background from yours? James was silent for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of every breath between them. Do you know when I first realized something had changed for me? He asked finally. Amelia shook her head. The morning after my allergic reaction, I woke up in the hospital to find you asleep in that ridiculously uncomfortable chair, still wearing clothes stained with my emergency medications. Your braids had come partially undone, and you had this little frown, even in sleep, like you were monitoring my vitals in your dreams. The memory brought unexpected warmth to her cheeks. I was simply doing my job. No, James contradicted gently, your job ended when you handed me over to the hospital staff. Everything after that, staying through the night, coordinating with doctors who weren't even your colleagues, remembering my preference for iced chips over water when post-anaphylaxis nausea hit, that went beyond professional obligation. He shifted slightly closer, his voice lowering. Want to know what I thought in that moment? I thought, this woman sees all my flaws and stays anyway, not because of my name or wealth or superficial charm, but despite all the barriers I've constructed to keep people at a comfortable distance. The simple honesty in his words resonated with something deep within Amelia, a recognition of the authentic connection that had developed beneath their outward differences. I should take a walk, she said suddenly, standing. The garden helps me think clearly. Understanding immediately, James nodded. May I join you? Neutral territory might be better for this conversation. The estate gardens at night held a different magic than during daylight hours. Carefully tended flower beds released intoxicating fragrance into the night air, while strategic lighting created pools of gentle illumination among deepening shadows. They walked in silence until reaching a stone bench position to overlook the reflection pool. My mother taught me never to compromise my dignity for any relationship, Amelia said finally, breaking the silence. She raised me to be self-sufficient, to build a life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or support. Sounds like wisdom born from difficult experience, James observed. She watched her mother stay with a man who diminished her daily because she feared being alone. Then my father left when I wasn't the son he wanted. Amelia traced patterns on the cool stone bench between them. Self-sufficiency became survival. And now you're wondering if whatever's developing between us threatens that independence, James concluded with characteristic perception. Yes, she admitted, and whether the cultural and social differences would eventually create resentments, and whether your mother's assessment might contain elements of truth, that I represent something temporarily fascinating but ultimately incompatible with your world. James considered this with the serious reflection that had increasingly replaced his former casual dismissiveness. Valid concerns, all of them. I'd be lying if I claimed they were groundless. His honesty surprised her. Most men would immediately protest. I'm trying to deserve your respect, he replied simply. That requires honesty, even when uncomfortable. The statement, unadorned by charm or deflection, touched something within Amelia that pretty words could never have reached. I can't predict the future, James continued after a moment. Can't guarantee that differences won't become challenges or that my family's dysfunctions won't create obstacles. What I do know is that meeting you fundamentally changed something in me that needed changing. He turned to face her directly, moonlight illuminating the genuine emotion in his expression. Before you, I was sleepwalking through a life I resented but lacked the courage to alter. Your uncompromising authenticity showed me a different way to exist, with purpose rather than passive opposition. That's a heavy responsibility to place on someone, Amelia said softly. It's not responsibility, it's recognition, James corrected. You aren't obligated to maintain that influence, but I want you to know the impact you've had, regardless of what happens next. A night breeze stirred the garden, carrying the scent of jasmine. In the distance, soft lights illuminated the main house, a world apart from this moment, suspended between what had been and what might be. I don't have answers tonight, Amelia said finally. My professional ethics, your family situation, our different backgrounds, these aren't simple obstacles to overcome with emotion alone. I'm not asking for answers, James replied, just the acknowledgement that what's happening between us deserves exploration, beyond convenient dismissal as temporary or circumstantial. The request was reasonable, more thoughtful than she might once have expected from the man she'd first met. Perhaps that evolution itself was answer enough for tonight. I can acknowledge that, she conceded softly. Something shifted in James' expression, relief, perhaps, or quiet hope. He extended his hand halfway across the space between them, an invitation rather than a demand. Small steps, then, beginning with honesty. After a moment's hesitation, Amelia placed her hand in his. The simple contact sent awareness coursing through her that had nothing to do with professional assessment and everything to do with fundamental human connection. Small steps, she agreed. In the garden's gentle darkness, with the estate's imposing silhouette standing witness, they sat together in a silence that contained more truth than all their previous words combined, no declarations of love or promises of forever, just two people acknowledging that whatever path lay ahead, they would navigate it with eyes open to both possibilities and reality. When James finally leaned forward, his intent clear in the moment before their lips met, Amelia made a conscious choice to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, questioning rather than demanding, a beginning rather than a culmination. The connection between them felt both inevitable and extraordinary, a moment where barriers of background, circumstance, and initial misconceptions dissolved completely, replaced by recognition of something genuine and rare. As they walked back toward the house along moonlit garden paths, quite different from the hospital corridors where Amelia's journey had begun, their hands remained linked. The distance seemed both shorter and more significant than before. Whatever challenges awaited, Elaine's disapproval, David's strategic maneuvering, the inevitable scrutiny of the world beyond the estate gates, tonight had created something authentic between them that would require more than circumstance or prejudice to dismantle. Small steps indeed, but in a direction neither had anticipated when Amelia first arrived at the Peterson estate, and for tonight, that acknowledgement was enough. Chapter 11, Against All Odds. The Peterson Foundation annual charity gala represented everything Amelia had spent her life working around rather than within: old wealth, strategic philanthropy, and social hierarchies maintained through subtle signaling intelligible only to insiders. Yet here she stood, at the entrance to the Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom, her simple black gown, purchased specifically for this evening, a stark contrast to the designer creations surrounding her. "You look beautiful," James murmured, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, and completely terrified. "Not terrified," Amelia corrected quietly, "just aware that I'm entering a minefield without a map." After their garden conversation 3 nights ago, they had established tentative parameters for exploring their relationship, professional boundaries maintained during Amelia's remaining contract period, transparency with David about their personal connection, and most importantly, honest communication about concerns as they arose. Tonight represented their first public appearance together, a decision neither had taken lightly. James had extended the invitation with uncharacteristic hesitation. "The gala is traditionally family-focused," he had explained. "My attending with someone signals intention. Are you certain that's wise right now?" Amelia had asked. "Your mother has made her opinions quite clear." James' response had been simple. "I'm done hiding what matters to me." Now, standing at the periphery of metropolitan city's social elite, Amelia focused on projecting the same quiet dignity that had guided her through hospital corridors and Peterson family tensions alike. "Remember," James said, sensing her internal recalibration, "half these people are my father's business associates who tolerate me out of necessity, and the other half are socialites who've watched me make an ass of myself at similar events for years. Their judgment is irrelevant." His self-deprecating honesty coaxed a smile from her. Quite the rousing pep talk. I save my best material for corporate restructuring proposals, he replied with a wink, then grew serious. Ready? Amelia nodded, drawing strength from years of navigating challenging situations with professional poise. Lead on, Mr. Peterson. Their entrance generated precisely the ripple of attention James had predicted. Conversations paused mid-sentence as curious gazes assessed Amelia, measuring her against whatever preconceptions James' past companions had established. To her surprise, David approached immediately, his public demeanor more gracious than his typical gruffness. Nurse Tyrone, he greeted her with formal warmth, I'm pleased you could join us this evening. Your presence is a testament to your impact on our family's recovery. The carefully worded acknowledgement provided context for her attendance that simultaneously honored her professional role while tacitly blessing her personal connection to his son. It was masterfully done, exactly the diplomatic maneuvering one would expect from a corporate patriarch. Thank you for including me, Mr. Peterson, Amelia replied with equal care. The Foundation's work in cardiac research is particularly meaningful given my professional background. Indeed, David nodded approvingly before turning to James. Senator Baldwin is eager to discuss the sustainability initiatives you presented last month. Perhaps you could spare him a few minutes. Of course, James agreed, then glanced at Amelia. Would you like to join us? I'll get something to drink and find you shortly, she responded, recognizing the business conversation didn't require her presence. As James departed with his father, Amelia made her way toward the refreshment table, maintaining the composed expression that had served her through countless difficult situations. She had just accepted a glass of sparkling water when a familiar voice spoke beside her. Well, if it isn't the nurse who launched a corporate reformation. Madison Pierce stood resplendent in emerald silk that complemented her blonde perfection, her smile social but her eyes calculating. Miss Pierce, Amelia acknowledged with professional courtesy, lovely to see you again. Isn't it? Madison took a delicate sip of champagne. I must say, you've accomplished what an army of debutantes and 2 family therapists couldn't, domesticating James Peterson. The entire room is buzzing about it. I haven't domesticated anyone, Amelia replied evenly. James makes his own choices. Madison's perfectly arched eyebrow rose slightly. Such modest deflection. Tell me, what's your secret? The Florence Nightingale effect, or perhaps just the novelty of someone utterly different from his usual milieu? Before Amelia could respond, another woman joined them, older, elegantly coiffed, with the confident bearing of established wealth. Madison, darling, aren't you going to introduce me to James' mysterious companion? Madison's smile tightened fractionally. Of course. Aunt Caroline, this is Amelia Tyrone, David's private nurse. Amelia, Caroline Whitcomb, James' godmother and Metropolitan Hospital Board member, nodded, her assessment swift and comprehensive. Elizabeth Chen speaks highly of your skills, though I confess surprise at seeing you in this capacity tonight. The implication was clear, professional boundaries had been crossed, a fact Caroline's position on the hospital board made particularly relevant to Amelia's career. My contract with Mr. Peterson concludes next week, Amelia stated calmly. All parties are aware of and comfortable with my presence here tonight. How reassuring, Caroline replied with practiced pleasantness, though one does wonder about the long-term viability of such unconventional connections. James has always had eclectic tastes but eventually returns to compatible circles, like Madison. The younger woman supplied with practiced modesty, we've known each other since childhood, some bonds transcend temporary diversions. The conversational assault was masterfully executed, polite enough to avoid appearing openly hostile, yet precise in undermining Amelia's position and confidence. In hospital confrontations, Amelia would have relied on professional authority. Here, she had no established standing to draw upon. There you are, James' voice cut through the tension as he rejoined their group, his relaxed expression transforming to alertness as he registered the dynamics at play. I see you've met my godmother. Caroline, we were just discussing hospital board matters. Caroline smiled. Miss Tyrone's reputation in cardiac care is apparently quite impressive, among many other qualities. James replied, his hand finding Amelia's in a public gesture that left no ambiguity about their relationship. Madison's smile remained fixed, though something flickered in her eyes. James, darling, your father mentioned you've been spearheading the new environmental compliance initiatives, finally embracing the family legacy. Parts of it, James acknowledged. The Peterson legacy needed significant revision. Inspired revision, apparently, Caroline observed with pointed emphasis, glancing between him and Amelia. The implication hung in the air until James addressed it directly. If you're wondering whether Amelia has influenced my recent decisions, the answer is unequivocally yes. She's reminded me that privilege without purpose is fundamentally empty. The straightforward acknowledgement left no room for subtle undermining. Caroline's expression registered surprise before settling into diplomatic neutrality. How refreshing to hear such candor at these events. Isn't it? James agreed pleasantly. If you'll excuse us, I believe the program is about to begin. As he guided Amelia toward their table, she murmured, that was direct. I told you I'm done hiding what matters, he replied simply. Besides, Caroline's approval of my choices expired when she encouraged my mother to seek fulfillment in Australia with her tennis instructor. Throughout dinner, Amelia navigated the complex social currents with increasing confidence. David, surprisingly, facilitated her integration by engaging her in conversation about hospital administration that highlighted her professional knowledge. Several tablemates, initially reserved, gradually warmed as she demonstrated intelligence and poise that defied whatever preconceptions they had harbored. Between courses, James leaned close, his hand finding hers beneath the table. How are you holding up? He asked, his eyes communicating deeper concern than his casual tone suggested. Better than expected, she admitted softly, though I'm starting to understand why you developed that practiced indifference. It's exhausting being constantly evaluated. His gentle squeeze conveyed perfect understanding. You're doing beautifully, and what matters most is what's happening here. He tapped his chest lightly, not out there. The simple intimacy of the moment grounded Amelia amid the social complexities surrounding them. This was the reality beneath the performance, two people connecting authentically despite external pressures. The evening's most challenging moment arrived during the foundation director's recognition of major donors. Elaine Peterson made her entrance halfway through the proceedings, her timing ensuring maximum attention as she claimed the empty chair at David's table, directly opposite Amelia and James. Mother, James acknowledged with careful neutrality, I didn't realize you'd be attending. The Peterson Foundation has always been a family priority, Elaine replied smoothly. I founded the educational outreach program, if you recall. Her gaze shifted to Amelia, assessing her appearance with the practiced eye of someone who recognized designer labels at 20 paces. Miss Tyrone, how nice to see you engaging with the philanthropic side of the family, though I imagine these events differ significantly from hospital fundraisers. Different atmospheres, similar purpose, Amelia replied evenly, leveraging resources to address healthcare gaps. How pragmatically expressed, Elaine smiled without warmth, though philanthropy in our circles extends beyond mere resource allocation to tradition and social responsibility, concepts difficult to fully appreciate without proper context. Before the conversation could deteriorate further, the foundation director announced the evening's largest donation, a significant endowment from Peterson Industries for cardiac research and treatment access for underserved communities. We're particularly pleased to announce this program was developed by our next generation of leadership, the director continued. James Peterson has championed this initiative personally, bringing fresh vision to the foundation's mission. Surprised murmurs rippled through the ballroom as James rose to acknowledge the recognition. Amelia felt a surge of pride, knowing how meaningful this particular cause was, not a generic charitable gesture, but a targeted program addressing gaps he had come to understand through their many conversations about healthcare inequality. I believe philanthropy requires both resources and informed perspective, James stated from the podium. This initiative was inspired by healthcare professionals who navigate systemic challenges daily, particularly those serving communities with limited access to specialized cardiac care. His gaze found Amelia briefly before continuing. When we listen to voices beyond our typical circles, we discover more effective solutions. The Peterson Foundation is committed to that broader perspective going forward. The speech was brief but significant, establishing James' emerging leadership philosophy while acknowledging influences beyond traditional Peterson circles. Watching him articulate values they had discussed during late-night conversations, Amelia recognized the authentic evolution of someone finding their voice rather than performing an expected role. When he returned to their table, David nodded with uncharacteristic approval while Elaine maintained a composed expression that didn't quite mask her surprise at her son's poised presentation. "Quite the departure from your usual foundation appearances," she observed coolly. "Last year, you arrived an hour late and left with the bartender, as I recall." "Personal growth, Mother," James replied calmly, "something worth celebrating rather than measuring against past mistakes." Later, as the formal program concluded and the evening transitioned to dancing and social mingling, James guided Amelia onto the floor for a waltz. His hand at her waist was respectful yet possessive, his movements confident as he led her through steps she had hastily practiced in her apartment the previous evening. "Still terrified?" he asked quietly, their conversation private despite the surrounding couples. "Less so," Amelia admitted, "though your mother's expression suggests I failed some essential evaluation." "Her approval isn't required for my happiness," James replied with simple certainty, "something I spent years learning." As they moved in perfect synchronization across the floor, Amelia allowed herself to acknowledge what had been developing between them, not merely attraction or circumstantial connection, but something more profound. Against all rational expectation, against backgrounds that could hardly be more different, against the subtle and overt opposition of James' social circle, they had forged something authentic. "What happens after next week?" she asked, voicing the question that had lingered unspoken between them, "when I'm no longer contractually bound to the Peterson estate." James' hand tightened slightly at her waist. "That depends entirely on what you want, Amelia. I know what I hope for, but this isn't solely my decision." The simple acknowledgement of her agency, her equal voice in determining their future, confirmed what she had come to believe about the man now holding her. Beneath years of practiced indifference beat the heart of someone capable of genuine partnership. "I hope," she began carefully, "for the chance to discover who we are together, without professional boundaries or family complications dictating terms." His smile, private, genuine, containing a vulnerability few had ever witnessed, was answer enough for tonight. Whatever challenges awaited beyond this ballroom, they would face them together, step by careful step, building something neither had expected but both now recognized as worth fighting for. Chapter 12, Full Circle. Metropolitan Hospital's rooftop garden had been created as a sanctuary for patients and staff, a place where healing could continue beyond sterile corridors. In late June, with summer flowers in full bloom and the city skyline creating a dramatic backdrop, it became something else entirely, the setting for a moment Amelia Tyrone had never anticipated when she first walked these halls as a dedicated young nurse. "Are you sure this is where you want to do this?" Dr. Chen asked, adjusting her formal suit with uncharacteristic nervousness. "The Peterson estate has those ridiculous gardens that probably cost more than our annual operating budget." "This is perfect," Amelia assured her mentor. "This hospital is where everything important in my life has happened." It had been 6 months since her contract at the Peterson estate concluded, 6 months of carefully navigating the transition from professional relationship to personal one. James had respected her need to re-establish her independent identity, waiting 2 weeks after her contract ended before asking her to dinner, a simple meal at a neighborhood restaurant near her apartment rather than some extravagant display of wealth. They had built their relationship deliberately, each step taken with clear-eyed awareness of the challenges their different backgrounds presented. Amelia had returned to Metropolitan Hospital, accepting Dr. Chen's offer to head the new cardiac rehabilitation program. James had accelerated his transformation of Peterson Industries, implementing sustainability initiatives that reflected his evolving values. "He's changed," Stella Tyrone had observed after meeting James for the 3rd time, her initial skepticism giving way to cautious approval. "Not pretending to change, actually doing the work." Now, standing in the hospital garden where countless patients had found momentary peace, Amelia smoothed her simple cream dress and waited. The small gathering represented the core people who had shaped her journey. Elaine Peterson had surprised them by arriving just that morning. After returning to Australia following a tense month-long visit, she had maintained distance until receiving James' heartfelt letter 3 weeks ago. In it, he had candidly addressed their fractured relationship while extending an olive branch. "I'm not here to judge," Elaine had told Amelia privately before the ceremony, her usual sharp edges softened. "I watched my son change these past months in ways I didn't think possible. At first, I thought it was infatuation, now I see it's much more." David, meanwhile, had surprised everyone by becoming an unexpected ally, once his initial strategic matchmaking impulses were replaced by observation of his son's genuine happiness. "Ready?" Dr. Chen asked, offering her arm. "More than ready," she replied, accepting his support as the small string quartet began playing. James waited beneath a simple archway of white roses, looking nothing like the dismissive heir she had met 10 months earlier. His expression as she approached contained everything they had built together: respect, admiration, and a love that had developed not despite their differences but through the understanding those differences had fostered. The ceremony itself was brief and personal. They had written their own vows, each promising not perfection but partnership, not blind devotion but clear-eyed commitment to growing together through whatever challenges arose. "When I first met you," James said, his voice steady, "I was sleepwalking through a life of privilege without purpose. Your unwavering integrity showed me a different path, not through criticism, but by example." When Amelia spoke, her words came from the heart rather than the careful script she had prepared. "You saw me when I was trying to be invisible behind professional competence. You challenged me to accept connection without sacrificing independence." As they exchanged rings, Amelia caught sight of her mother wiping away tears beside a surprisingly emotional David Peterson. Their unlikely friendship represented everything this union symbolized: worlds converging through mutual respect rather than remaining separated by superficial differences. The small reception took place in Metropolitan Hospital's renovated atrium. James had insisted on using Peterson resources to benefit the hospital that had shaped Amelia, funding renovations that would serve patients and staff long after their wedding day. Later, as guests mingled, Stella approached her daughter with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Your father called," she said quietly. "Saw the engagement announcement in the business section, wanted to attend but wasn't sure he'd be welcome." The revelation might once have reopened old wounds. Now, Amelia found herself considering it with surprising equanimity. "Perhaps next time," she replied. "Some relationships take longer to heal." Like the Petersons, her mother observed wisely. "That boy's mother did a number on him, but he's working through it, like someone else I know. Your dignity never required perfection, baby, just authenticity." As the evening progressed, Dr. Chen raised a toast that captured the essence of what many had witnessed. To Amelia and James, proof that healing happens in unexpected ways, and that the most effective medicine is sometimes seeing someone clearly when they've forgotten how to see themselves. 6 months later, they stood together in the newly established Peterson Wing for Cardiovascular Access at Metropolitan Hospital, a joint project combining James' business acumen with Amelia's healthcare expertise. The facility would provide specialized cardiac care to underserved populations, inspired by conversations they had shared during late nights at the Peterson estate. "Not bad for a reluctant heir and a dignified nurse," James observed as they watched the first patients being admitted to the new wing. "Not bad at all," Amelia agreed, her hand resting instinctively on the subtle curve of her abdomen, a secret they had only recently confirmed and shared with their immediate family. 9 months after their wedding, Amelia gave birth to twins, a boy and girl who embodied the union of two seemingly different worlds. As James held his daughter while Amelia nursed their son, the circle that had begun with a reluctant nursing assignment felt complete. "They're perfect," James whispered, his voice containing wonder that transcended privilege or position. "They're the beginning," Amelia corrected softly, "of something we're building together." In that quiet hospital room, far from the Peterson estate's opulence, yet connected to it through the man who had transformed from entitled heir to purposeful partner, Amelia recognized the truth her mother had always tried to impart: dignity wasn't found in isolation or self-sufficiency, but in remaining true to your values while opening yourself to connections that challenge and strengthen you. What had begun as a professional assignment had evolved into a life partnership neither had sought but both now treasured, proof that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead precisely where you need to go, if you have the courage to follow them with eyes and heart open to possibilities beyond your previous understanding.